the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Iger.
Bob Iger is here. Thank you, Bob, for being here. Of course, one of the most influential CEOs in the country. You okay, Jeff? Okay. Jeff Sonnenfeld, everybody making an entrance. Bob Iger is here, as I just mentioned. He is one of the most influential CEOs in the country, leading one of the most iconic companies. He had retired, as we all know, but just over a year ago, he returned to be Disney's CEO once again. It was supposed to be for 2 years. It's now going to be 4. Oprah has called Bob one of the greatest business leaders of our time. But today, as we all know, the Mouse House facing a number of big challenges, and we're going to talk about them all. The streaming businesses, efforts to cut now more than $7 billion in costs. The activists will get into the second longest labor strike in Hollywood. AI, DeSantis, wokeism, succession, creativity, China. We're going to try to touch all of it.
If you don't mind, this should be a 5-minute interview. I got to get back to work.
You got to get back to work.
All those things.
So here's what I'm going to start with this. A year ago, you're sitting around your house, maybe puttering around, I don't know. You think you're about to get a phone call from Susan Arnold, who's on the board.
Chairman of the board.
Chairman of the board.
Was. Mm-hmm.
And you think that call might be asking you back. And you say to Willa Bay, your wife, what?
Well, I was aware that Susan Arnold, the then chairman, wanted to talk to me, and I got a sense that the board was making a decision to make a change at the CEO level at Disney, and that they might ask me to step back.
And you say to her?
And I said to Willow, I'm getting this call. It's possible that I could get asked back. She immediately said, well, maybe not. Maybe she just might. They may want your advice.
But she didn't think you were getting the call for that.
She wasn't sure, and I said, well, what if I get asked? And interesting, until maybe a day or two before, first of all, I was not seeking to return to Disney at all, and until a day or two before, I was not anticipating I ever would. And so I asked Willow, what do you think? And she said, well, they might not ask you, but if they do, she thought I had to say yes. And I asked why, and she quickly reminded me what I already knew. She said, you ran the company for over 15 years. You've been at the company, or you were at the company for almost 50 years. You kind of owe it to the company. If the board wants you back, because they obviously don't feel they have an alternative, at least not at that moment, then you owe it to them to say yes.
Okay,
well, it was very quick, and I realized as I heard her words, she was absolutely right.
Okay, what does she say now?
I haven't talked to her about it. What does she say now? Interesting, maybe surprise you. I don't bring that much work home with me. I like to leave the job at the office when I can.
But you didn't think it was going to be like this?
In her work. No, we've had conversations about it being much more challenging than I expected. I felt that from the beginning when I came back. But I'm not daunted by it. It's just a lot more work, nor is she daunted on my behalf.
You said that you didn't want to come back, but, there's been a lot of reporting that you never really wanted to leave. And even people now say, well, is he really going to leave in 2 years from now again? That you were frustrated. You were frustrated with Bob Chapek.
That reporting is completely inaccurate, completely. I had been CEO for about 15 years. I said I started the company in 1974 at ABC. It had been around a long time. There were plenty of things in the world that I was interested in, that I either wanted to do or wanted to learn more about. I had not really had a day off, and I don't even remember. And I was thoroughly enthusiastic.
But you were frustrated.
Plus, I felt that I had accomplished so much during my former tenure, including opening the Disneyland in Shanghai and going to the streaming business very successfully. And it wasn't about being bored. It wasn't about lack of challenge. It was just that the time was ready.
But it's fair to say you were frustrated. You were watching this company.
Frustrated about what?
From the outside. On the outside. Oh. You're now out.
You were asking me about whether you ever wanted to leave in the beginning. The answer is I did, which is why I left.
Okay, but now you're on the outside.
Right.
And you're watching.
Busy, doing other things.
Doing other things, but Bob Chapek's in that role.
Yes.
And you were thinking what?
I was disappointed in what I was seeing, both during the transition period when I was still there and while I was out. But I really worked hard at distancing myself from it because, one, I couldn't do anything about it. In a way, it wasn't my business at all, really. It was his business to run. And I was not happy with what I was seeing. I worked hard to build the company into what it was over that long period of time. I was proud of those accomplishments. It hurts when something that you've put your heart and soul into, right, and that you care about so much is going through a difficult time.
Okay, so let's then talk about succession, because there's a lot of people in this room, business leaders, who have to think about their own succession, other types of succession. Mm-hmm. What was your mistake then? To the degree you think that Bob Chapek was a mistake, I assume you imagine it's maybe one of your biggest.
Well, first of all, I'm not the only one that may have considered it a mistake. The board obviously had its issues with Bob. But you knew him well. I've tried he worked for me for quite a long time. I've tried hard to conduct my own post-mortem, just so that we as a company don't do it again. What did we do wrong? And we've discovered certain things that perhaps we could have done better, but there were also a lot of unknowables, and I don't want to get into any of those.
But is there a lesson for you in terms of who you're supposed to listen to, in terms of...
it was interesting, when the vice president was talking about it, there's no job that really trains you for this job. In many respects, that's true at Disney too. It's a large, very complex company that's in the public eye all the time. There's interest from just about every sector of society in Disney, and it takes a certain type to be able to not only compartmentalize when it comes to managing issues and problems, but I think it takes a certain constitution, a tremendous amount of energy, a tremendous amount of patience, the ability to communicate on multiple subjects, sometimes back to back to back to back. And I think that when we make the decision again, and the succession,
what will be different this time?
The succession process at Disney, first of all, is robust right now.
But was it not robust the first time?
It was, but I think we're approaching it differently, and I just don't want to. It's just not something that I feel. Other than saying that we're aggressively pursuing succession, there's no more detail that I want to give.
Do you think in 2 years you really will step down?
Given the list of things that I have to do, I'm definitely going to step down.
Well, you could say, given the list of things you have to do.
No, we're attacking each one of them. I'm confident we will do so successfully.
Let's talk about that list for a second, because one of the things you did, and I want to get your thinking and just understanding how you think about it. You went on television over the summer from Sun Valley, and you put out a lot of things on the table. You said, we're thinking about selling ABC and the linear channels. We're thinking about finding a partner for ESPN. We're in the midst of trying to figure out with Hulu. You've now resolved that. You talked about some of the creative channels. You put everything out there. And by the way, the folks at ABC just up this way almost had a heart attack when they heard all of this. What was your thinking in terms of, just take us inside the thinking of saying that all aloud? A lot of CEOs try to wait until they have each deal done.
I've spent a year since I came back fixing a lot of problems that the company has had and dealing with a lot of challenges, some that were brought on by decisions that were made by my predecessor, some that are just basically the result of a tremendous amount of disruption in the world and in our business, including dealing with the business model that those linear channels have rested on and have succeeded on top of for decades. And sometimes when I'm looking for kind of a reaction to my own thought process, I like to test that process in public, particularly in ways that I might be able to actually get a reaction from in the investment community. So my thought was at the time that I would essentially be public with some of that thought process. I think what I said about the media networks at the time was that everything was on the table, and they might not be core to our company. Right. I think I went that far, and that was a means of my saying to Wall Street or the investment community that our heads were not in the sand about the challenges that those businesses were having. I did not want to get accused of being kind of an old media executive. That we're a company that had already shown an ability to basically adapt to new circumstances. So I wanted, one, convey that, and two, see what the reaction would be. Would it be applauded? Would it not? I did not say they were for sale. The coverage of what I said they were for sale. There's a theme here, by the way, a little bit, just in terms of what is being
Is
written
it for
about
sale?
us and what is accurate. No, it is not for sale. But like all of our assets, we constantly are evaluating what is their value to the company today. What could the value be tomorrow? Is it a growth business? Is it a business that?
But do you like the business still?
Contract?
I mean, there's been a big question about the linear channels and whether they're worth keeping.
What we've discovered in this process, which has been unbelievably rigorous at the company and involves a number of executives who are managing those businesses, we've determined a few things. One, that they can be run more efficiently. With some difficult choices. You mentioned cutting over $7 billion in costs. We can do that. Second, they can be run in partnership with those businesses that sit atop the new business model, which is streaming. And there are means of aggregating audience, of amortizing cost, of basically aggregating audience, reaching more and different people. And so we actually, through this process of being more public about what might happen or what could happen, and really rolling up our sleeves and figuring out, is this something we should do? Should they be divested? Should they be kept? If they are kept, how should they be run? And actually, they're being run much more efficiently today than they were in July when I made those comments.
Let me ask you a different question. You ultimately bought Hulu from Comcast.
Yeah.
But you said the following. You said there are 7 or 8 platforms in the streaming business alone that are general entertainment. That's a tough business to be in competitively, and it's not our strongest suit.
When I came back to the company, and the company had been through a difficult time, partially because of COVID, and the balance sheet wasn't as strong then. It is much stronger now than I would have liked it to have been. I asked the question, do we write Comcast a check for what could be $9 billion? Or should we consider selling it to them? Is the business unique enough, valuable enough to us long term for us to write them the check and buy the whole thing, or the opposite? And I created a rigorous process to determine what is the right answer to that question. I worried that there was, in general entertainment programming, unlike Disney and Pixar and Marvel, that it's not as differentiated, maybe not as valuable. But then through this process, determined that owning the whole thing had real value, because partnering that business with the other branded streaming business, Disney Plus, could actually create a huge opportunity for us, and thus we decided to keep it rather than sell it.
Let me ask you about that IP. You just mentioned Pixar and Marvel and so many of these other things. Very recently, as you've seen, because you get the box office numbers every weekend, a number of these films have not performed. They have not performed the way they used to. People question the creative magic at Disney. You can look at the Marvels. I'm curious why you think that disappointed. You could look at Wish, Indiana Jones. What do you think? What's happened?
Well, I think you have to look at it a couple of ways. First of all, I think the movie business is changing, actually. Box office today is about 75% of what it was pre-COVID. I think we have conditioned the audience to expect that these films will be on streaming platforms relatively quickly, and that the experience of accessing them and watching them in the home is better than it ever was. One, easier to access in terms of the technology. Right. Two, just the visuals, better sets in your living room than before. And a bargain when you think about it. Streaming Disney Plus you can get for $7 a month. That's a lot cheaper than taking your whole family to a film. So I think the bar is now raised in terms of quality about what gets people out of their homes into movie theaters. Some of it is just being part of basically the social wave. Certainly Barbie and Oppenheimer did that for 2 other studios. And so I think that's one thing. Second, in our particular case, and specifically about those films, some of those films, they were not as good, they were not as high in quality, not every one that you mentioned, as some of their predecessors, our films, and as they should have been, particularly in this environment.
Why do you think that was?
Well, The Marvels was shot during COVID. There wasn't as much supervision on the set, so to speak, where we have executives there really looking over what's being done day after day after day. And that was a result of, mostly of COVID, but at the same time, we increased our output tremendously to feed the streaming platforms. Too much, by the way.
Mistake.
Definite mistake. Quality needs attention to deliver quality. Doesn't happen by accident. And quantity, in our case, diluted quality. And Marvel suffered greatly from that. So there are different reasons, and I'm the first. I've been very public about it, saying, and I would say right now my number one priority is to help the studio turn around creatively. Now, let's also put it in perspective. We set the bar so high. Year after year after year, we had the best performance in the business, probably for a decade. And I'm not sure another studio will ever achieve some of the numbers that we achieved with multiple. I mean, we got to the point where if a film didn't do $1 billion in global box office, we were disappointed. That's an unbelievably high standard. And I think we have to get more realistic. A couple of the films you mentioned, by the way, which is interesting about kind of the New World Order, did okay at the box office. Elemental's a good example, about $500 million at the box office. By the way, to some studios, that would be a gigantic hit. When Disney has a $500 million film, it's a failure, which is interesting. But then it went on Disney Plus and had massive consumption. Right. So that says something. Maybe people didn't perceive it was the kind of film they needed to see in the theaters, but they certainly, when they discovered it on Disney Plus, enjoyed it.
Bob Iger, everybody. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much. That's fine. I appreciate it.